Hi, I'm Chef D-Mart. I get a lot of questions about brisket. How do you cook them? Do you wrap them? Do you use a Texas wrap? Do you use a crutch? Or do you just go straight through? And I say, I do both. Here's what I have today, 2 briskets, 1 unwrapped, 1 wrapped. Let me show you how I did it. Here we have 2 briskets, Superior Angus. If you don't find Superior Angus, that's all fine. That's fine also. Choice is great. The training process will be the same. What I've been doing though is I've been letting them sit on the counter just like this, roughly 5 hours. I say at least 4 hours up to 6 hours, but I want to warm them up on the counter. And so what I did was, you can tell, when I first pulled it out, I probed it, and now I'm going to probe it again. And what you're going to see is that it's up to 57, almost 60 degrees. That's a good thing. One of the hardest things about cooking brisket is the stalling point. You have a large piece of meat, and if you rush the cooking process too quick, it will stall because it will sweat. You'll read about this all over the internet, and that's what I'm trying to help you out with today. So let's get to trimming. I'm going to open this bag and try to dry it out. And dry it out as much as possible. So on the brisket, this is a whole brisket, and what you have is a flat and a midsection. What I'm going to do is take all the silver skin off here, and I'm going to take this down to very close to the meat without taking the meat. On the reverse side, I'm going to take a lot of this off, and what I want to do is allow the meat to absorb the smoke, the fresh hickory smoke. Get that nice bark on the outside of the entire brisket, but keep it nice and juicy inside. And don't worry, just because we're losing a lot of this fat does not mean we're losing all the juice either. There'll be plenty. 9-inch boning knife is what I prefer. So starting on, let's start on the front side is what I typically do. And I start on this, the flat side. What I'm going to do is take this boning knife and get it right under that silver skin and go away from me, pick it up, and bring it back. If you watch my pork videos, I do the exact same thing. This is very similar in shaving off silver skin on any cuts of meats. It's a back and forth motion to get only the silver skin off. The reason I use boning knives is they bend and they go with the grain of the meat, so you're not fighting against it too much. And if you take chunks out of it, it's okay. Over time, you get better with this. Going to the midsection, you see this big fat piece. I'm taking all that off. Just ride it until you feel the meat. People say that's the flavor, and I said, nope, you will see this is not the flavor. This is something that most people never eat. This is intertwined into the whole part of the brisket. The brisket comes from the shoulder and the breast of a cow, and it has plenty of juice and marbling and fat all within the meat. And there you go. Left a little skin so that I'm saying it's not perfectly going to be completely gone, but what you're going to have is more variety of the smoke hitting the brisket, and it's going to cook a little bit lighter. And then the top, you see a lot of area and texture. So we'll be seasoning these up with cracked pepper and salt. All right, one brisket is done. Going to do the exact same thing to the second brisket, and then we'll go to the next step. So now we're going to season. I'm using a drip tray for one of these, and this the silver tin for the other. The first thing I'm going to layer in is salt, and always put it in a different container. You don't want to put it on your shaker. In case your hands get messy and cross-contaminated. So you know whatever there's salt's in here and pepper you're going to use, and that'll be for this recipe. And so what I'm going to do is season really heavily. People say go high, and that's fine. You just want to get it as even as possible. And if you go low, that's fine too. I'm going to show you a little secret. Use your other hand and just rub it down and in. You're fine. It should start dissolving pretty quick because this brisket is warming up. After that trim, you can tell it's already warm. I'll get a temp on it shortly. but I want to get these seasoned sooner than later with salt. All right, you got your salt on. Now we got some good cracked pepper. We're going to throw some cracked pepper on here on the backside. Well, interesting enough, I always start seasoning on the brisket facing down. So now when I flip it over, it's ready to go, and we're going to season the top. It's going to get a chance to stick on the bottom. So now we're going to do salt again. Nice layer. And before we put these on, so we're about 30 minutes away from putting these on the smokers, maybe 45. We're going to see if the salt has disappeared, because these briskets are definitely getting warm, which is great. They'll cook evenly. So we're seasoned up on our briskets, and now I'll just get a quick temp, because remember, that's what I want to do is warm them up, and I can tell these are starting to sweat. So we're 62 right below the mid, right around 60 on the midpoint, and 63 on this flat. So once again, you're seeing different temps, but right around the 60-degree mark. So in about 30-45 minutes, we're going to check it one more time before it on the smoker. And once again, this just allows the brisket to come up as we light the big green eggs for this smoke overnight. We are outside and we're ready to light. Kamado fire is a little tricky. It's hard to hold temps for long periods of time. I'm going to show you a technique about how to place the fresh wood, how to put your lump coal in, how to light the fire, not light too much, but to hold the temp for who knows how long, but until this brisket's done. We might make one adjustment an hour later, but I'll explain that later when we get there. Let's go light these eggs. As a chef, I like Jealous Devil lump coal. What I find is it's very reliable. It holds its temp overnight, and I've used this many times. Inside the green egg, what we're going to see is the leftover charcoal. So what I did is I swirled it, took out the ashes, so it's all nice and clean. You want it as clean as possible. You don't want anything in there. I'm going to use about 5 to 7 chunks of charcoal, but really 5 to 6 inches of fresh wood. And this is hickory only. And this is our third ingredient, which is hickory. When I put them into the old charcoal, I'm making that circle towards the center. That center is basically how it's going to burn down overnight. So yes, remember, if you don't have the old charcoal, you need to put a layer above the fire grate. We're going to add more lump coal to cover up this initial layer of hickory. So I arranged the lump coal pieces to have a landing area of 5 inches so that when it lights, we're going to create a fire in this area specifically with lump coal. And so now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but it's almost a landing area for the fire. And you're going to have 2 of these fire starters together, and that's how we're going to light them. It takes roughly 15 minutes, but we want to make sure that it creates an area of all the coals lit within about 5 to 6 of them lit in a 1-inch flame. That's the key. So we want to make sure we have that right to light just enough fire. When you light these fire starters, remember, keep the green egg open and the bottom vent completely open. You want as much airflow right now to make sure those fire starters burn out. We don't want that in our fire. It's been roughly 10 to 12 minutes. And what I want to talk about is the fire starters. Most people will go, oh no, the fire went out, because you saw about a 2 to 3 inch flame going for a while there, and you're like, oh, it's burning, we're gonna be fine. But yes, now it went out. So what I want to show you is get something that will, you can play with it and tap your fire starter. If your fire starter disintegrates, that's a good thing, okay? If it's still paper, you gotta let it keep going. I know there's no fire yet. Let it keep going. On the XL, you see the paper still there. This is gonna take time. Sometimes it takes longer than others. Depends on environmental factors such as airflow, if the weather's good, if it's dense out here. Right now it's really humid where we're at, and it's actually kind of warm, so that doesn't help fire. If this was a winter time where it's cold air, the fire would be going even faster. So know your environment, and that's the thing about cooking year-round with Kamados, is the fire is going to act differently. So that's why I want to show this little tip about the fire starters, that sometimes you just gotta give them a little bit more time to develop that flame we want. 1-inch flame, good diameter of 5 pieces lit. The large was lit first, and what I will say is I was aiming for about a 5-inch diameter with a 1-inch flame. Now, what I've seen is the charcoal fall down a little bit, and that will happen, so don't worry. But if you see a fast rapid flame with a 3-second test, you gotta make sure to go. You cannot wait for a flame. It's hot. One thing I wanna note, I used the large chunks at the base. I found smaller chunks with more of the end bark, okay? Order as I'm gonna do is, within here, I'm gonna scoop back a couple pieces to get all the red coals exposed. Just a little bit, okay? So now you see about a 4-inch diameter. And I'm gonna dump all this fresh wood right onto this. And now, drip trays. I have an aluminum drip tray here. We wanna save all those juices. Remember, this brisket is gonna be with no barbecue sauce. Make sure you have something aluminum or something that's like a tray you'll see on the extra large. And our brisket. Now we probed the brisket and it's up to about 63, 62 degrees, and it is definitely ready to go on a smoker. One tip I want to mention is, notice how I put the large part or the mid towards the back. Remember, your flow of your air goes through down here and comes out the back on a smoker, even though it twirls and convex. And that's why I'm putting it here. Now we're gonna shut this down. We're gonna do a 1/2 inch on top, close your grate, do a 1/2 inch on bottom. The only other adjustment I'm going to do is in about 1 hour. Depending on your air circulation, depending on your flow, depending on your fire, the fresh wood has to burn off. That's gonna take about an hour, hour and a half. That tempo of that smoke is key. That's the whole reason I want to make this video. As we see this regulate in about an hour and a half, maybe an hour, that's when we're gonna know how this holds temp at around 200 to 210. But remember, I'm not waiting to bring this egg up. I'm literally bringing it up with the brisket even to have it cook nice and forward all the way up to 200 degrees, okay? So remember, chefs, our brisket was warming gently inside on the counter. We trimmed, it warmed up. We seasoned, it warmed up until we got the fire just right, and now the egg is warming up with the brisket. This is so key, and I can't stress enough that this is where the stall period is not affected. And then when we come back tomorrow morning, roughly 9 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, you're gonna see the results of these briskets. Can't wait for it. All right, it is the next morning. These have been going overnight, so let's check them out. I will tell you, this large green egg with that little fire we talked about held temp great overnight. So now we are at 220, and it hasn't moved ever since we set it. The extra large, I will tell you, I adjusted both these eggs one time. So we started at 1/2 inch and then we went a little bit smaller. And as you can see on this XL, I had to go really, really tight on both of the vents to get the temp to where I wanted it. This did go a little high, so let's see what happened. On this large though, this is where you just see the brisket perfectly. And we're already at 200 degrees mid, no wrap. Great juice, as you see. This is the temp that held this brisket all night and cooked it perfect. On the extra large, now we can see there's not much juice. It didn't render as much. Well, the fact that it got up to about 275 and I had to go even smaller on the vent, so I made, once again, 2 adjustments on the XL. This is what happens sometimes, and this is okay. What I have here is 2 cups of stock, beef stock. Literally, if you have any kind of stock will work, but I prefer beef stock. And now we're gonna wrap this. When we look at the temp, what you'll see is we're right around 176, 180. So we're not far off. We need another 20 degrees to get to 200. and that wrap will do the job, and it'll render juice. So let's go over that wrap real quick. You never want the juices to come out. Essentially, what you're doing with the brisket is you're braising it, so you need that liquid to stay with the brisket the entire time. So I do 3 layers to make sure we catch all the juices and the brisket fits. Make a bowl. You want to do this because when the brisket and the juice goes, you don't want anything to fall out. So once again, on 2 cups of broth, I'm not looking to submerge this. I just need a little more liquid to get this going. So we're a little under 2 cups. Making sure that brisket gets a good bit of liquid to go back in the braise. So we used about 1.25 cups on this. Always have it handy just in case. Now when you're wrapping, make sure you're wrapping and pinching tight on this aluminum foil. It's very important to get it as tight as possible. And look at this. See how this poked through right here? That brisket's pretty firm, but that's why I do multiple layers. And that's where if you didn't, all the juice would come out and the braise wouldn't work. And that packet of juice will help that brisket come up to temp, because now all we're trying to do is get it to about 200. Since it's at 180, it's roughly going to take about an hour to an hour and a half after this. So as we put on the briskets last night at midnight, now it's roughly 10 o'clock, so the brisket's been going for around 10 hours. So 12, 13 pounds, we have 10 hours here with the wrap, so that's going to take roughly 11.5 hours, and this one's done at 10 hours. And you see how a brisket with the right temp can go straight through, no stall, hit temp, and be ready to go. When we pull that one, we'll put this one in the same juice that it's left over, and we'll see what's the difference. But really, we're just waiting for this to get to temp. Look at this, we got 2 briskets, both hit temps. 1 no wrap, 1 with the wrap. So let's get to slicing and see what the difference really is now. First off, I'm going to tell you the smell is amazing. Oh my gosh, I could eat this whole thing right now. Now, even though it came out of the green egg and it was done and I never wrapped it, I still grabbed any juice to put on it. And typically what I'm going to say is always keep that brisket juice with the brisket. I call it the brisket gold. And that's where it's going to keep it a little bit more moist. But if not, dry brisket is phenomenal. I just want to make sure you know the difference of having some liquid and not using barbecue sauce at this point. So as the grain's going this way, I'm going to start in this corner and start making cuts to see what we got. And as we go, we're going to put it back into liquid every slice. Make sure you have a really sharp knife, because this bark, as they say, and that's what everyone asks me about bark. It's crunchy and it's layered to that right texture. And notice you don't see a smoke ring. A lot of people ask me about smoke rings, and I said, well, if your brisket warms up slowly with the egg and the smoke penetrates it evenly, you're not going to have a smoke ring. Cutting the mid, you want to cut in slices. Typically the rest period would be at least 30 minutes. Some people say 4 or 5 hours. I say I can't wait that long for brisket. What I have done though is let it sit overnight. You would have to reheat it to 130 degrees if you're going to eat it after that. So once it goes below 130, you have to reheat it back up to 130. And that's a safety precaution. But if it's cold, you can get much thinner slices. And that's where, because sometimes when you start going with these big slices, it start shredding and falling apart when it's warm. And this brisket is still very warm. This is getting into the mid now. Once again, just making slices. The color looks phenomenal. Now sometimes when I get to this back mid part, I do kind of start cutting it different because it starts shredding. So I'll cut it right down the middle and work in a smaller piece. See how it just starts falling apart? But this is a midsection, a lot of juice, a lot of flavor. And you could continue to keep, remember when I said trim the fat off the back? This is what you get. This is why I took all that fat off the back side of that brisket. You get more texture and more bite, more flavor. All right, as you can see, I'm almost done, just finishing it up. I kept the flats on one side and I kept the mid and the back end on the other side. Keep tossing it in the juice just a touch. You could add a little broth if you wanted to at this point, but I think the texture and the juice of this all looks really good. And just gonna let it sit until we eat. It's ready to go. But make sure to keep it covered and try to keep it in juice as much as possible. And that's the brisket, never wrapped. Let's go to brisket number 2. On to the second brisket. And what I was saying was this brisket was in the extra large, and initially I had to make 2 adjustments. An hour and a half, I saw it going up above 250, so I went to barely open on the top and the bottom, brought the temp down to 250. So the extra larges sometimes do that, but like I said, when I woke up there wasn't much juices, so we added a little broth. And now we're seeing where this brisket is finishing, and you can definitely tell that it has enough liquid. And as I was saying, the second brisket, it is definitely hit temp because it is hot. And as you can see, in the wrap, we have some great juice left over with the broth and some of the beef fat now that rendered down, so that's definitely going to be used in incorporating into the brisket slices. The first knife I used is a chef knife. The second one I'm going to use a bread knife actually, and we'll see if it cuts a little bit smoother, this brisket. Starting with the flat again, you see how even the brisket is with the smoke and how it penetrated. So that's a great signal that the brisket has been properly smoked without the intense smoke rings as people always brag about. And I say, this is the brisket that I like, is where it's all even within the meat. So you don't even know if there's smoke, you just know there's flavor. I guess the texture difference I'd mention of this one being wrapped and not wrapped is this one feels a little bit firmer to cut. And I think the bread knife helps too. That's why I've started using bread knives for brisket, because the bark is thick, and that's where you're trying to make these long cuts. And it helps with how it cuts the brisket. Ultimately, the smells are very similar and definitely has the big flavor. The hickory is there, the salt and pepper, very similar. You can taste a little bit more of the beef broth, but I will tell you, everyone's gonna appreciate that nice salty finish. We are talking about brisket, and we're talking about the briskets that just came out. So yes, here we go. The one brisket was on the large egg, never wrapped. And you can see the color is showing a little difference now. And I will tell you, still phenomenal taste on the flat to the mid. The bark is there throughout the whole brisket. The flavor is unbeatable. Sometimes I get a little bit more juice out of the briskets, but I think just holding the briskets longer took a little juice. So if you do this recipe, hopefully yours turns out with a lot more juice. And don't use barbecue sauce until you need it. This brisket is phenomenal, as is. For the wrap brisket, I will tell you, unless this wasn't next to it, you could tell that this is almost a perfect brisket too. When you pick up the mid and you just see this perfect bark, nice and crunchy and nice even texture, and just how it nicely pushes apart. Flavor is undeniably there. I will tell you, both these are great briskets, so I'm glad I could show you an unwrapped version. My preference is probably unwrapped if I could get it there. Every time, even myself doing briskets all the time, I still have to wrap it at times. So, still delicious, still a great way to always cook brisket, never lose your money. Thanks for watching, hope you subscribe, Chef D-Mart.